Hi everyone, we're Caleb and Ava. Today, we're bringing you a suspenseful story. Is this all a murder case, or just my imagination? Is the police's account the ultimate truth? Let's dive in. Late at night, driving home, I got pulled over for a DUI check. My wife and I were terrified. I was shaking uncontrollably in the driver's seat, while my wife lay in the trunk, eyes wide open. The police car lights were glaring in the darkness. I pinched my palms hard, but my hands kept trembling. My heart felt like it was about to jump out of my throat. Blow into it. I took a deep breath and blew into the device the officer held. He glanced at the results, but didn't let me go. "What's wrong? You not feeling well?" I replied, "I'm okay." The officer stared at my face. Seconds ticked by. Cold sweat broke out on my forehead, and my hands shook even more. In the rearview mirror, another driver stuck his head out the window, impatiently looking forward. The line of cars kept growing. The officer looked stern and extended his hand. "Show me your license." It was in the passenger seat's compartment. I leaned over to search for it, every move watched by the officer like a needle prick. I handed him my license. He matched the photo, scrutinizing me closely. My license was fine. I just hoped he'd let me go quickly. Horns honked behind me, and drivers on the opposite lane glanced over. But the officer wasn't letting me go. "Pull over to the side." My heart sank. I almost wanted to slam the gas pedal and flee. My wife's body was in the trunk. If anyone found out, my life would be ruined. But some rationality remained. Escaping wasn't an option. The car couldn't go more than 5 kilometers before police cars surrounded me. Being a guilty man, fleeing was just too dumb. All I could do was cooperate, stay calm, and try to get through this. So I followed the officer's instructions, pulled to the roadside, turned off the engine, and took a deep breath to steady myself. The officer handed the breathalyzer to a colleague and then approached me. "What's up, officer? Did I fail the test?" He ignored me and started walking around the car, checking for any signs of wrongdoing. In the rearview mirror, he paced by the trunk, frowning. "Open the trunk." My blood ran cold. "It's not convenient." "Why not?" The flashing red and blue lights cast a stern shadow on his face. "There are unpublished manuscripts and contracts in the trunk." I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady. "According to the contract, I can't show them to anyone." He stood silent for a moment, then called the Traffic Management Bureau. After confirming there were no accidents nearby, he returned to me. "You're named Caleb, right? Sounds familiar. Are you famous?" He held my license, not returning it. "Not exactly. Just written a few novels." "Oh," he said, not very surprised. "You write horror and thriller stuff, right? I've read your books." Turns out, he was a fan. No wonder he didn't question the manuscripts in the trunk. A sliver of hope flickered in my mind. Maybe he'd let me go because he liked my novels. I quickly tried to bond. "That's awesome. Can I get your address? I'll send you a copy when my new book comes out." There was a pen in the car, but no paper. On the passenger seat was a diagnosis from a psychology clinic I visited today. In a panic, I tore a strip of paper and handed it with the pen. He didn't take it, but glanced at the diagnosis. "What's this?" I hesitated. "It's a diagnosis from my psychologist. I just went today." Embarrassed, I didn't want anyone to know about my mental health issues, especially since he knew I was somewhat famous. But he reached out for the paper. I had no choice but to hand it over. He read quietly, mumbling, "Bipolar disorder, panic attacks, tremors, palpitations, daily valproate sodium. By the end, his tone seemed to lighten. I guessed he found the reason for my odd behavior, which gave me some relief. He handed back the diagnosis. "Looks like you're really not feeling well. Why didn't you say so earlier? I almost took you to the station. You looked so guilty, like a thief caught red-handed." "Sorry, big shot. Didn't mean to waste your time. You're free to go. Drive safe." He took a step back, signaling me to leave. I started the car and sped away. He watched my black Audi fade into the night, chuckling softly. "Writing all that spooky stuff must have driven you crazy." Driving through the night, the headlights foggy and the view limited to the narrow road ahead. Suddenly, something terrifying appeared in the rearview mirror. My wife's face sticking out from the back seat. Pale and stiff, her black eyes stared straight at me. I was terrified. The car swerved uncontrollably towards the roadside. At the last second, I slammed on the brakes, the screech echoing through the night. The car crashed into a lamppost. My head hit the steering wheel, warm, sticky liquid flowing from my forehead. Ignoring the pain, I looked back. My wife was gone. The trunk had popped open, seemingly throwing her out. Just as this thought crossed my mind, her image appeared in the left side mirror. She had been flung out and was crawling back, using all her limbs in a bizarre, twisted way, like a monster from a horror movie. Her neck twisted unnaturally, turning to face me with a horrifying, stretched smile, revealing 2 rows of teeth. My heart stopped. I knew she could see me. Her corpse-turned monster lunged at the car, slamming into the door. Alarms blared, lights flashed. She didn't seem scared. Her face pressed against the window, features distorted, eyes staring down menacingly. Sweat covered me, and I frantically hit the brakes and tried to start the car. But it roared and then died. The dashboard lights all came on, and no matter how much I pressed the start button, the engine wouldn't budge. The car was wrecked. Despair engulfed me. She discovered the door handle and started ripping at it, the sounds sending chills down my spine. I prayed the locks were strong. After a while, she gave up and climbed onto the hood, trying to get through the windshield. She seemed to have lost all human sense, driven only by an instinct to attack. In the mirror, the open trunk let in some street light, and distant buildings blurred in the night. I didn't dare look back. The corpse monster was pounding on the windshield, her gaze fixed on me. If I moved even slightly, she'd get more aggressive. I avoided the mirror, fearing she'd notice my gaze in the open trunk. Minutes felt like centuries. I sat frozen, muscles tense, legs cramping. She jumped off the hood again, pacing nervously by the car. She'd soon notice the open trunk. Overwhelmed by fear and horror, memories flashed, her nagging me to fix the trunk, always breaking down. Vivid recollections, every detail clear, even the hair on her cheeks. My brain began to shut down. Lost in thought, an eerie silence pulled me back. A chill froze me in place, unable to move. Struggling to turn my head, I saw her corpse in the trunk, eyes meeting mine. She slowly opened her massive mouth, revealing rows of white teeth. Extreme fear somehow calmed me. I stayed still, quietly unbuckled my seatbelt, grabbed the plug, and stared at her, planning my escape route mentally. Earlier, I had driven to a secluded area to hide the body. The place was deserted, with a dilapidated building in the distance, a shell of its former self. It was my only escape route. When she attacked, I'd jump out and run there, hoping for a chance. She twisted her neck like a long worm, wearing a bizarre mask. My heart pounded, nerves on edge, waiting for her to attack. She didn't. My mind started wandering, picturing the door not opening, tripping while jumping out. I couldn't take the torment and let go of the plug. The seatbelt snapped back, resembling a twitching snake in the dark. Her corpse was distracted. I seized the chance, opened the door, and bolted. The abandoned building was about 100 meters away. I sprinted desperately, the night wind burning my lungs. Entering the building, everything went dark. Whether from sudden darkness or lack of oxygen, I couldn't tell. I barely held onto the concrete wall to avoid falling. Breathing was a struggle. I was about to pass out. The building was littered with construction debris, climbing frames tangled with torn safety nets, almost no walls. No hiding spots. I forced myself to keep running upstairs. Each step kicked up dust, the sound of my shoes scraping the cement steps making my heart race. I tried to tread lightly, but couldn't avoid the noise. Just as I considered taking off my shoes, strange noises came from below, scratching sounds like many feet swiftly moving. It freaked me out. I couldn't imagine what form her corpse had taken to make those sounds. No time to remove my shoes or worry about footsteps giving me away. I ran upstairs. Reaching a few floors up, I hid behind a massive concrete pillar. The scratching got closer. I pressed my back against the rough wall, hurling into the shadows, closing my eyes and muttering, "It's all a hallucination, just a hallucination." I wasn't crazy. I had some mental issues, but not schizophrenia. I often hallucinated, likely due to my profession, and my hallucinations were creepy and threatening. Even knowing they weren't real, I couldn't break free. It wasn't my fault. No one can escape hallucinations on their own. Mental illnesses aren't self-healable, or there wouldn't be so many sufferers. I studied psychology in college. No one knows better. Her corpse was still in the trunk, and the monster chasing me must be a hallucination. But I couldn't shake the fear. Hallucinations are unreal, but the fear is real enough to break someone's spirit or even cause a heart attack. I was being killed in a hallucination, while in reality, people would only find a terrified corpse. Escaping this horror required outside intervention. A therapist, police, even a delivery guy. Anyone to say something, do something to pull me back to reality. The scratching stopped. I stared blankly for a moment, then realized the monster had stopped on my floor. A chill ran through me, freezing me in place, unable to move. After a brief silence, the scratching returned, this time coming my way. It was slow, like she was searching for me. Did she find me on this floor? Suddenly, I noticed footprints in the dust. Footprints! Despair hit me like a bucket of cold water. I leaned against the concrete pillar, my mind shutting down like a rusty old machine. As I slipped into unconsciousness, I felt something cold and rough. A brick. Shivering, my awareness snapped back. I grabbed the brick and threw it out the window, hoping to distract her. It smashed to the ground, but I didn't know if it would fool her. She was still coming. Scratching noises became chaotic. She sped downstairs. Thank God, I thought, turning to the stairwell. A long, black shadow moved swiftly under the moonlight, like a snake slithering with tiny legs. My stomach churned. I finally understood the scratching sounds. It was like a snake moving, her corpse turned into a disgusting monster. She was my wife, Ava. We'd been together for years. How could I imagine her like this? A gust of night wind made me shiver. My shirt was soaked with sweat, cold against my skin. I stood up, stumbling out of the building. My wife was dead, poisoned by me. I'd bought the poison, hidden it in the cabinet. Today, while she was out, I planned to end my life. But editors showed up, distracted me, and I forgot the poisoned lemonade on the table. When I rushed back, she was dead. I couldn't explain it. I wasn't afraid of death, but I couldn't be a murderer. I couldn't let my parents suffer my disgrace or be despised by the world. If convicted, all my works would be banned, my efforts wasted. No royalties for my parents. I cried beside her body and decided to dispose of it quietly. Her parents were long dead, few friends. If done right, it could be covered up. I put her in the trunk to bury in a secluded place, but had another breakdown midway. From afar, the building's upper half looked darker, likely unfinished. Such abandoned buildings are common. Construction stopped due to lack of funds or permits after a few floors. Climbing 2 floors, I saw semi-enclosed structures and corridors. I found a hidden air-conditioned room curled up in the dark corner, trying to hide. The priority was to find someone trustworthy to save me, someone who could keep the secret even if they saw her body. My parents weren't in town. The only person to ask was my good friend and agent, Liam. I sent him a WhatsApp for help with my location. It was 11:30 p.m. I worried he was asleep, but his call came quickly. My phone screen lit up in the dark. I hung up and texted him, "Not a good time for calls. It'll attract the monster. Please come get me. I'm already on my way. Hang in there." Liam knew my condition. He'd helped me through hallucinations before. I briefly remembered the crash, her corpse thrown out, lying on the ground. If Liam passed by, he'd find her and might call the police. I needed to explain everything first. I sent another WhatsApp detailing the events. After minutes, he sent a short voice message, just 2 seconds. "You mean Ava's corpse changed?" Surprised, I typed back, "No, it's monsterified. In my hallucination, Ava's corpse became a monster." After a long wait, Liam's WhatsApp came through. I read his message multiple times. That might not be a hallucination. I couldn't understand. Maybe the voice-to-text messed up, so I listened again. That might not be a hallucination. His voice was gloomy and hoarse, each word clear. A bad feeling settled in. Trembling, I typed, "What do you mean it might not be a hallucination?" After a while, he sent a 42-second voice message, followed by more. As I transcribed them, I learned a dark secret about Ava that no one knew. Once, in a remote mountain village, starving from a severe drought, villagers turned to cannibalism. Desperate, they decided to cook and eat the village's youngest child. The village shaman tried to stop them but was beaten. The chief claimed relief was on the way, but someone blamed the shaman for failing to bring rain, accusing him of offending the gods. The villagers overpowered the shaman's family, cooking and eating them in a gruesome ritual. Blood mixed with the soil, human remains scattered. When relief finally came, a monstrous entity rolled out of the village, made of many human parts, terrifying the soldiers who tried to flee by burning the mountain. Ava was descended from these villagers, her family following the ancient rule of immediate cremation to prevent such horrors. I broke into a cold sweat. The story was absurd, unbelievable, but I'd seen my wife's corpse turn into a monster. Liam and Ava had been childhood friends, introduced 3 years ago. He knew Ava better than I did, and I couldn't doubt him. My mind was a mess, pain unbearable. I typed, "You know my condition. Don't joke like this. It'll worsen my hallucinations." Liam replied, "This sounds crazy, but trust me, hide well, don't let her find you." "I'm coming." Staring at my phone, I felt uneasy. Something was off. I reviewed our conversation and realized Liam told me the story to make me believe my hallucinations were real, urging me to hide. This would only worsen my condition. He knew I was on the brink of a breakdown, yet he did this deliberately. A chill ran through me. Why would he? a creepy thought surfaced. I wasn't talking to Liam. Or the real Liam. We'd been friends for years. He was logical, unimaginative. The story matched my writing style, suggesting our conversation was all hallucination. I was deep in hallucination. It felt real, even logical. The monster could see my footprints, and Liam explained Ava's transformation. No matter how absurd everything was, it was trying to convince me it was real, dragging me into madness. I lost. I took out my phone, opened notes, and started writing my last words. Trapped in a brain-in-a-jar scenario, I couldn't distinguish reality from illusion. The me writing was just a desperate signal, while the real me was collapsed in the cramped elevator. A WhatsApp from Liam popped up. "I'm here. Where are you?" I ignored it, continuing my note. The hallucinations were hostile. If I told Liam my location, the monster would find me. His messages read, "Are you okay? I'm in the building. Which floor are you on? Why aren't you responding? Can you see the WhatsApp? Speak up. Where are you?" Seeing his messages, I imagined his frustrated expression. Then I thought, if hallucinations can deceive me, maybe I could trick them. To test it, I replied, "I'm on the 10th floor." Actually, I was on the 8th. The monster was 2 floors above, luring Liam up to see what happens when the hallucinations meet. I turned off my phone, pocketed it. Suddenly, footsteps approached. Liam wasn't running. His steps echoed like a drum in my heart. After several seconds, the footsteps faded. I leaned against the wall, breathing heavily, trembling uncontrollably. Suddenly, my phone buzzed again. Liam called. Hesitant, I turned the volume down and answered. His frantic voice said, "I saw it. It's chasing me. Hide well. Don't come out." Before he could finish, the line went dead. My hand froze around the phone. Was Liam protecting me? Was he real? Or just another hallucination? Had Ava's corpse also been a hallucination? Before I could think, Liam reached my floor. His panicked footsteps and the rustling of his clothes echoed in the empty building. No place to hide. He couldn't fight the monster. He came to save me, but I was hiding, leaving him to be killed. Guilt and fear overwhelmed me, making me impulsively jump out. Didn't think why he was only on this floor. In the darkness, Liam stood before me, a shadowy figure. His face cracked open, eyes bloodshot. "Found you!" I ran. After a few steps, a gust hit me. I dodged but was grabbed by the shoulders, pinned to the ground. I fought with everything, but he was too strong. Punches shattered my nose, vision blurred, ears ringing. "Liam!" He dragged me along the ground. Realizing he wanted to push me off the 8th floor, I grabbed a brick, smashing his arm, desperately trying to climb. As he lunged again, a dark shadow swooped in. A 2-meter-long centipede-like body, Ava's head on it. No time to hesitate, I fell backward. The two things clashed mid-air and fell together. My head hit the concrete hard, pain exploding, and I blacked out. When I woke, I was still in the dark building. I sat up, dizzy and nauseous. After minutes, I steadied myself. I lay by the building's edge, looking out from dozens of meters up. Nothing below, no blood, no shattered bodies. It was all my hallucination. I walked out into the moonlight, feeling like I was back in the real world. The car was parked roadside, untouched. Ava's corpse was peacefully lying in the trunk. I couldn't resist touching her cold face. "Good. You still look beautiful." Closing the trunk, I started the car and drove towards the outskirts. Half a year later, I turned this bizarre experience into a short story in a new anthology. Unexpectedly, it attracted a special visitor. One day, while brainstorming at home, The doorbell rang. Expecting the editor, a young stranger with a uniform entered. "Who are you?" I stood to inspect him, feeling oddly familiar. "Don't you remember me, big writer?" he said, showing a badge. "I pulled you over." Memories of that DUI night flooded back. I smiled slightly. "Oh, officer, please have a seat." He sat across from me, holding my new anthology. "You promised to send me a copy when it was published. Didn't leave an address, but seems like I have one now." "I read your book because of it. I went through a lot to get your address." I smiled politely, suspecting his intentions. He didn't beat around the bush, flipping to the short story and pointing to the page. "You killed someone!" I laughed. "That's just a story." He shook his head seriously. 6 months ago, there was a murder at that abandoned building. A man and a woman died. She poisoned herself before falling, and there was a bottle of poison left at the scene. The man was Liam, your partner at the bookstore. The woman was Ava, who moved here 3 years ago, orphaned, and was Liam's childhood friend. These match your characters perfectly. Frustrated, I said, "Using real people as story bases is common. Didn't you appear in the story too?" He stared at me deeply. "So, you're bold. If I hadn't read your story, I wouldn't suspect you of the building's murder. Police investigated, but found no cameras or suspicious signs, so they didn't suspect foul play. But I know you left towards the building that night." I laughed. "There are tons of roads that way. How do you know I went there?" He replied, "I can't be sure. Even if I checked the cameras now, the footage from 6 months ago is gone. You could say your story was inspired by your friend's murder, or that you happened to be near the area that night. But I'm certain your trunk had Ava's body, just like in your story." I looked at him. "Officer, you might have paranoid delusions. If needed, I can help you find a good therapist." He laughed dismissively. "Let me guess. Here's how it happened. Ava was Liam's mistress. To cover himself, he introduced her to you, making her your girlfriend. You unknowingly got cheated on, got angry, and decided to kill both of them. Since your affair was secret, you rarely appeared in public together. All records show Liam's identity. Even expenses like meals and movies were under the bookstore's name. This gave you the perfect cover. You could eliminate them without leaving traces, only showing their inappropriate relationship. I guess these identity tricks were Liam's idea? Before coming to your house, I talked to Liam's wife. When she found out Liam was close with Ava, he told her you were using his identity to be with Ava. Because you're famous and didn't want trouble, you used his identity for your affair. So Liam, under your name, had an open affair, deceiving you and his wife. On the night of the murder, you first poisoned Ava, moved her body to the abandoned building, then somehow lured Liam there and pushed them both off the building without a trace. I listened to his rant, handed him a glass of lemonade. You must be thirsty after all that talking? He stood up, looking down at me. I'll have the police continue the investigation. You might have erased some traces, but you can't erase the record of buying poison. I was stunned. He suddenly laughed. I knew it. Buying poison was real. I didn't believe you'd dare include your crime in your book. Just wanted to trick you, but you actually did it. He grabbed the book and walked towards the door. I stopped him. Officer, I'm afraid to disappoint you. He sneered. Still denying you killed anyone? I chuckled. Ava bought the poison. I had reasons for her to do that, like wanting to commit suicide and leaving my assets to her since she knew about my severe depression. He was dumbfounded. What did you say? Say that again. I lounged on the sofa, staring at his hand slipping back into his pocket. Look at your face. When you stood up, you really turned off the recorder in your pocket. Life is a gamble. Luckily, I always win. The young officer's veins bulged. You said you tricked Ava into buying the poison. No, you're hearing things, I said concernedly. You really need to see a psychiatrist. You seem seriously unwell. I stood up to escort him out. He held the door frame, refusing to let me close the door. Pulling out a recorder, he shut it off in front of me. You killed them both, didn't you? I shook my head sadly. Officer, it was all a coincidence. I didn't kill anyone. Everything I said was a joke. I'm really sorry. He left reluctantly. Watching his back, I thought, his biggest regret would be not checking my trunk that night. The truth will forever remain unknown to him.